The Good Girl Confessional podcast and WB40, Women Beyond 40, would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded lands on which this podcast and our platform is recorded and researched, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nations. We pay our deepest respects to their elders, past and present, and we pay homage to their ancient culture of storytelling. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm your host Sandy Lowres, and the Good Girl Confessional is proudly brought to us by WB40, Women Beyond 40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond. Today in the podcast, I'm really excited to be chatting to the incredible Danielle Colley. Danielle started, her professional life basically writing life as a blogger and then became a journalist, and she was writing for the Australian Women's Weekly when she unceremoniously lost her job and really ended up in a place of burnout, which has happened to so many women. She decided that cannot be all there is to life, just endless rounds of stress, and decided to launch on a journey of healing and self-discovery, which of course then led to an amazing new career as a coach. She has written this extraordinarily delicious book. It is called The Chocolate Bar Life. It's brilliant, and it is packed with delicious little facts, as you would imagine a chocolate bar would be, as well as Danielle sharing her incredible story. She does share some really amazing tools in this book, and I know you're going to love her. Please welcome to the confessional, Danielle Colley.
Hey, how about a podcast about all the music that got us hooked up, knocked up and broken up? If that got you humming a hit from the 70s and 80s, then have we got a show for you. I'm Jo Pybus, and when Sandy's not in the confessional talking to awesome chicks, she's driving a Sandman over to my place and co-hosting Alex the Seal with me and Molly, a podcast about music nostalgia. Just search for Alex the Seal on your podcast app.
Hi, Danielle. How are you? Welcome to the Good Girl Confessional, finally. Hello.
I'm great. Yes, thank you. It's been a while in the making, this one. I'm glad that we finally caught each other.
I know, it's fantastic. And I, of course, have been very lucky to speak to a couple of your friends on this podcast, including the lovely Caroline Tate and Gillian Moody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lovely. Oh, good. Yeah, you got it. You got all the A-team.
The A-team, that's exactly right.
The A-team. Yeah.
And they always spoke so fondly of you, so it's really lovely to finally meet you here, at least like over online. We're not face-to-face, sadly, but we're here, so this is good. First of all, I want to say a big congratulations to you on this beautiful book that you have launched. It is, of course, called The Chocolate Bar Life. I love the title. Creating a delicious balance between work, rest and play. So congratulations.
Thank you.
How long was it in the making?
It's been, well, look, how long is any book in the making, right? So from the time I decided to write a book to it launching, it was maybe 12 months, but I had been toying with the idea of writing a book for a little while prior to that. And the content of the book obviously has been, in production forever. The Chocolate Bar Life philosophy is something I've been working with for a while. So, it's how long is a piece of string question, that one. A year ultimately is it from deciding to do it to launching it, which I hear is actually quite quick. I've heard of people who sit down and write a book in a weekend, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not one of those. I just chipped away at it, and then we launched.
Yeah, that's amazing, because I have had a few authors on this podcast who it took years and years for their book to be finalised, even though 5 years of writing to finalise a book. So 12 months is a really intense and brilliant effort. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I actually had at my book launch in Melbourne recently, had Ruth Clare as my fabulous MC. She's an author. She wrote a book called Enemy, but she's currently writing her second book, and she's up to her 16th edit. And I was like, oh, no, that's not me. I did like three or four. That's it. Like, let's go. Let's launch this sucker.
Oh, that gives me great hope. I always go, oh yeah, I'm going to finish mine. I'm going to do it. It's going to happen. And then I just put it to the side, Danielle. So I'm like, I don't know about this edit situation. I love the idea, you just mentioned it then, of this Mars bar philosophy. And for those who don't know, I don't know where they've been living, but of course a Mars bar is a delicious chocolate bar. Tell me about, everyone who reads the book will know this, but if they haven't, tell us about the Mars bar philosophy and where that came from, because I absolutely love the story of where you first heard it.
Sure. So I was at a stage in my life where I was completely frazzled. I was a solo parent. I was a journalist. I was stressed to the hilt all the time. I knew it wasn't sustainable and I wanted to make a change, but I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. And I had a conversation with a clairvoyant, actually, and she said to me, you need to make your life more like a Mars bar. You need to find the balance of work, rest, and play. And of course, I remember the ad from when I was a kid, a Mars a day. So I thought it was super cute and I put it in my pocket, but I didn't know what it meant. Like, I didn't know what to do about it. I was too engrossed in my survival mode to be able to really think about what my next stage was going to be. And things actually kind of got a bit worse for me before they got better. But after that, this crappy low period, I went and retrained as a life coach and studied neuro-linguistic programming and hypnotherapy and positive psychology coaching and stuff. And then I started actually working with people. I didn't actually go to learn how to do all of that stuff so that I could be a coach. I went because I needed to get off the couch. I knew that I was in the doldrums myself, and I thought some of these tools might help me. And so I started working with people straight away, and I started to see similarities of myself and them, successful people whose lives look good on paper, and it just didn't feel how they thought it would, like they have enough money, they've got a home, they've got the things that they, need to be okay. Some of them even absolutely thriving financially or career-wise. And yet there was this vacuum. There was something missing and it just didn't feel good. So I started to really think about this whole sort of Mars bar thing, this work, rest and play idea. And I started to work with people in my leadership workshops and work with my clients one-on-one, talking about like this balance, this idea of balance, which everyone sort of thinks is a bit of a unicorn. And I remember this one day I got right into it with this guy that I was working with. He had been working in C-suite sort of positions for a large amount of his career, and twice he'd burnt out to the point where he had been hospitalized, and he was about to go into another big job and didn't want to do it the same way. He wanted to do something different this time. So I was going deep on the Mars bar. I was like, you've got the nougat portion and you've got the caramel portion. And I think, the nougat, if we think about the nougat as like our work element, like work is always going to take a large part of our lives. And the nougat is the chunkiest part of the Mars bar. And then if we look at the caramel, that is the rest portion of our, of our trio. And it's smaller than the nougat. Like it's not in the equal ratios. And then you've got the chocolate, which is hardly anything really. And that is your play. So I was going deep into it. When you bite the Mars bar, even though they're not equal ratios, it tastes like a symphony in your mouth. That is so delicious. It just works, right? So when you have your life prioritized with these elements, that you're mindful and intentional about having work, rest, and play present in your days, your weeks, and your months, then your life feels sweeter to live. It's never going to be equal ratios. That is where the myth of balance lies, but it doesn't need to be equal ratios in order for life to feel more delicious to live.
Oh, I absolutely love this. And in reading that in the book, it just made me smile, because I think a lot of women in our age demographic, and older than you, but in our age demographic, we are probably the sandwich generation. We are juggling, quite often women are juggling aging parents, they are juggling teenage children, they are juggling full-time or part-time work, they are juggling, all the activities that go along with that sort of a life. And it's difficult. I think on top of that, and this is the bit that made me smile, on top of that, we're also heading into perimenopause.
Oh my God.
Menopause, right? And so I read that and kind of went, how did I survive that? My parents have now passed away, my teenage children are now adults. I'm still in the grip of perimenopause. It's still happening. That hasn't gone. But I think it's quite an extraordinary feat, and we think that we can do it all. So talk to me about that.
It's whether we think we can do it all or not is kind of irrelevant. It's thrust on us. Like we don't have time to think about whether we can do it or not, because it's just there all of a sudden. That's exactly where I found myself at the beginning of the book. I've got my mum who has multiple sclerosis and lives in a big wheelchair. She actually came to live with us at the end, as the book was just coming out. She had to move out of her home and come and stay with us for a while we found a permanent solution for her. And then, I've got my kids. Yes, perimenopause. Yes, I had this diagnosis as well of a late diagnosis of ADHD. So I had like a perfect storm happening and a home renovation, had this perfect storm happening. And I think that often we don't realize these complex layers of external stuff we have, obviously, your hormones, your health, the stuff that you can control is one thing, and then you have all of this external stuff, your kids needing whatever, your work stuff happening. So I think that sometimes we're like the frog in the pot. It sort of reaches this boiling point before we even realize that the water's getting too hot. And I mean, what is the solution? Aside from all of us, running away and living in a commune together, I don't think there is one. I think that having a greater awareness of what our stretching points are, being aware about like energetic boundaries, like how much energy we have in any given day, and being more compassionate with ourselves and knowing that sometimes shit just gets hard and that's okay. It's okay to not have it all together all the time. And I think that is potentially where we trip up the most, is feeling like we can't have an outward appearance of struggling. It's like I've just got to just keep tap dancing or just keep swimming, as Dory says, just keep going and suck it up. This is how it is right now, as opposed to getting the support that you need, whether that is with some hormonal support, seeking, a therapist or some kind of coach, having time out with your friends and just having a jolly good whinge, whatever it is, getting a bit of support to be helped through these trickier times.
Yeah, and I think that you really hit the nail on the head in your book when you actually talk about the reluctant, how reluctant we can be as women, I think, to ask for help or to admit we need help, or to just say, hey, I'm kind of drowning over here, I'm not waving. I think there has always been this extraordinary pressure on our generation of women that, our mothers fought for, our rights so we could go out and do whatever the hell we wanted. And it sounds great in theory, but the reality is it does make us feel like we are supposed to, from the outside, we want people to think we've got all of our shit together. We are brilliant. We're Olympic level plate spinners and we can just get everything done, right? Do you think it is changing that we as women, as you say, we do get together with our girlfriends and we go, this is the reality of what is going on in my life right now. Do you think it's getting easier for women to actually speak up and say, hey, life is not always a bed of roses and things get hard?
I mean, I don't want to make a broad sweeping generalization about like all women, but I think that as like there is a movement somewhat between in all people. Like there has to be, like the global burnout stats are 8 out of 10 people are going to experience burnout symptoms in 2024. So we know that there are a lot of people feeling this kind of pressure. The other stats are like 48% of businesses, I think, are getting set up for wellbeing practices, whereas that's 52% that don't. So that's a lot of people that are like slipping through the cracks, right? So I think that the more we talk about or normalize things being unsustainable and how to create the safety nets, how to create the boundaries, how to set ourselves up so that we can, I mean, we want to still have the ambition, you know, we want to still do the things that we want to do, whether it's a career ambition or a life ambition, like whatever, like we still have goals that we want to go for. And it's not about throwing all of that away and simply saying, you know, I'm going to protect my my energy by not doing anything. I'm quitting life. You know, like that's not realistic. You know, we're still these creatures who want to be actualized and we want to, you know, do cool shit. So I think it's the movement needs to be around having greater awareness, like self-awareness of when it's time to run and when it's time to rest, you know, when it's time to push. How much can I do in any given week? And for us to have greater, I think, language and communication around that with, you know, with our employers, with our family, with whatever. The issue, I think, is not FOPO. Fear of other people's opinions, right? We don't want anyone to judge us as not being able to cope or not coping. Like I've worked with so many women who have been at a point where they're about to quit their job because the workload is too great or energetically they're too stretched, right? Because, I don't know, say there is something else happening outside of work, whether it is in the tasty sandwich that we just mentioned, and they're energetically sort of pulled somewhere else. So their bandwidth, right, their brain is thinking about this, you know, little fire that's going on in their life or major fire, whatever it is that's going on in their life. So, so these women have been about to quit, and I've said, "Have you talked to your boss?" And they're like, "No, there's no way. Like, this is the deal. I work these hours. Everybody's working like this. This is the workload. This is the understanding. This is the contract," right? And I'm like, well, we can just accept that as the status quo, or you're about to leave anyway. Maybe have a conversation. And it astounds me. Almost every time. In fact, I say almost because I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea that it's always roses. But 100% of the time, in my experience, there has been a compromise that has worked, if not forever, at least for a time. And if you don't ask, you don't get. If we don't, people aren't mind readers. So I think we need to just get better at being vulnerable and authentic.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do think it's, again, not necessarily our natural go-to as women.
Yeah.
And, right, is that this whole thing of, oh, don't rock the boat, don't speak up.
Yeah.
And look, I will say I have experienced true burnout, and I didn't really understand what burnout was until I went through it myself. And I know a lot of people who have actually experienced it. I think especially since COVID, because I think it was such a phenomenon that happened, such an extraordinary time in our lives. And for those of us living here in Melbourne, where the lockdowns were so extreme that I think a lot of people went through it. And we were working, those of us that could work from home were working our asses off and working really long hours, I think because it was filling time or whatever was going on. But for me, it came when, and it's different for everyone who goes through burnout, but as you say, it's external things. So my house flooded. I couldn't live in my house for 11 months. We were out of it. We were swinging between Airbnbs and finally a rental property, waiting for the insurance company to fix it. on top of that, full-time work, juggling the Good Girl Confessional and WB40, Women Beyond 40. And, juggling all those things as well as my life that, goes on. I've got kids and a partner and life. And suddenly felt like one day I just didn't want to get out.
And perimenopause.
And perimenopause. Let's not forget that.
I think we really underestimate the impact of haywire hormones.
100%. I agree with that. And I think that, it's really interesting too that even though I worked in an environment that was like all women talking about perimenopause was really, really uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I was like, can't believe this, because on my platform, I shout it from the rooftops. I talk about it a lot. So for me, I was quite intrigued to find out how many women really are uncomfortable with it, don't want to talk about it. And then how do workplaces maneuver that if people aren't even comfortable talking about it amongst themselves? Which is really fascinating. But I think you're right. Really interestingly, I changed work, and I am working for a brilliant organisation now. But one of the things that I did do when I was in negotiations for this new role was to say, well, what would it look like if I worked a 9-day fortnight rather than a full-time, right, rather than a 10-day fortnight? And they were just so open to it, saying, yeah, sure, great, do it. And I
absolutely
right.
When talk to me about when you went into that space where you knew that you were burnt out. How long did that frazzly, fried, crispy feeling last for? And what did you do in order to help yourself climb out of that hole?
Out of it? Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, honestly, if I look back, probably a good 6 months. So the things that I had to really do, I needed to work and I needed an income and I needed all of these things, and I had to keep going. So some of the things that I did was I started to say no. I have a very busy social life, but I really started to say no and set those boundaries because I just couldn't do it. One of the other things that I did was I took a break from the podcast, and it was a very deliberate move, and to kind of and just really put it out there and was very honest about it, and hoped that, our listeners and our supporters would be okay with it. And 100%, Danielle, they really has been. They've just blown my mind. It's been really great. And I think what I had to do was sort of say, I can't do all of this right now. I'm not saying forever, but right now I can't do it all. So I let some things slide by the wayside, and I thought I'll pick that up later. I took a deliberate break from recording the podcast because I'd been doing it every week for the longest time. And prior to the podcast, it was a blog. And so therefore it felt like I've been doing this every day for 10 years without a break. And I would go on holidays from my normal, from my day-to-day job, but still be doing all of this because it was, what I did on the side and my passion. I really just had to take a step back and say, no, I can't be all things to all people, and I can't do all things all the time. And I really needed to take care of my health. And one of those things was, whether it be walking or whether it was writing or whether it was whatever I wanted to do. And writing purely like journaling rather than worrying about, I've got to write an article or I have to do this or that.
Yeah.
Right. I think I just had to
writing to help process all the stuff that's going on. It takes, once you get yourself to that point, right, the point of no return, 3 to 12 months.
Wow.
To get out of the hole.
Yeah.
Right. And as we said before, so often we're in the pot, it's getting warmer and warmer, and we're like, I'm just going to push through. And then all of a sudden, it's past the point of no return. And you have to take that huge step back. And as you said, there's a lot of it's a great luxury to be able to just go, I need to take 3 weeks off or 3 months off, right? Not very many people can do that. I had a buffer when one of my burnouts, as you read in the book, I've burnt out a number of times. It's a specialty of mine. I feel like ADHD really contributed to that.
You had the triple whammy really when you think about it. So ADHD, perimenopause, and of course burnout. Yeah. And my lovely co-host over on my other podcast, which is Alex Cecile, Joe Pybus, shout out to Joe, also has talked about that as well. Late diagnosis ADHD, going through perimenopause at exactly the same time and thinking, what is happening to me right now?
What's wrong with me? Yeah, it's a particularly spicy combo. And I mean, I may have never known. Had nothing changed within my sort of hormonal equilibrium, then I may never have known. I may have just thought, like, this is just how I operate. And it is just how I operate. It's not that it's a problem. It's just that now a whole lifetime of certain behaviors, feelings, and challenges now make sense. And so I can set myself up better in order to support my unique needs. But it definitely was spicy. I mean, I found myself, and this is the thing, with perimenopause, we have a certain understanding of the symptoms, but when we read them on paper or hear someone talking about, oh, I've got a hot flush, oh, I don't know if I'm coming or going, I'll take my cardigan off, put my cardigan on. There's that. Oh, I'm so sleepless. Oh, I get so sweaty at night. Oh, gosh, I've got brain fog, right? So we hear these things in so these terms or whatever, but when you actually are in it, experiencing it, it feels very different on the inside, particularly if you add in, some existential dread, because perimenopause loves to give people anxiety. People who have never had anxiety before are suddenly feeling this racing heart. What's wrong with me? I don't know why I'm so scared to get up today. Different sort of things. And I hadn't ever heard anyone talk about as a symptom a crash of self-esteem. All of a sudden, I was like, I've got nothing to say. I'm no one and nothing, and I don't want to get up in the morning. And that is not me. I mean, usually you cannot shut me up, right? But all of a sudden, I just felt like I was insignificant. And it was these kinds of feelings. I felt like getting up in the morning. I usually jump out of bed in the morning because I've got children and I have to, right? Yeah. All of a sudden, everything got very, very hard. And I didn't realize that was something that can come along with perimenopause. So, then when I went to the doctor prescribed anxiety meds. And I said to her, I don't think that anxiety is the problem. Like, if you take anxiety meds, like, great, I'm super happy for you. But and if it works for you, then that's awesome. I knew for me that was a symptom, not the problem. I needed to get my hormone balance back under control. I needed to get my brain back under control, get my dopamine levels back under control, and then the anxiety just would go away, which it has. So, yeah, I agree. More conversations around perimenopause and advocating for ourselves, recognizing the burnout symptoms, things like that. Often people don't even know what we're looking for when we talk about burnout. Like, what are the precursors? What are the red flags? How do I know if I'm in danger of it? A lot of people don't have any idea, and then all of a sudden they feel like absolute crap and life is really hard. And it's like, how did I get here? So I think more conversations around that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the brilliant things that you touch on, and by the way, and I have talked a lot about this lack of self-esteem that happens for a lot of women, myself included, and anxiety, as you mentioned. I am not an anxious person. I've never gone through great amounts of anxiety other than when big life things were going on, like a divorce or whatever. But in my day-to-day life,
that makes sense, right?
Right. Yeah. It makes sense. You can almost compartmentalize that and go, that's because I was going through that. To wake up every day with this kind of, as you say, this feeling of dread. And so I have talked about my experiences of that and said to people, speak to a doctor, get out there. And if a doctor dismisses you, go find another doctor and just keep going till you find one who gets it. And I think that was really what happened for me. Was I found this amazing doctor, she's brilliant, and said, you know what, your hormones are all over the place and let's get that sorted first. So I was really lucky that, she said, this is perimenopause. And funnily enough, probably about 18 months prior to this really happening to me, I had gone to see my doctor and I said, I think I'm going through perimenopause because I'm really hot all the time and not in a good way. And she had taken my temperature and said, you've got a raging fever. And I remember thinking, that's hilarious now, because I remember thinking at the time, this is what women do too, is we put stuff to the side ignored. So when 18 months later I went to her and I said, these are all the things I'm going through. And she said, yeah, because you're perimenopausal. And I said, are you sure I don't just have a temperature? Which was quite funny. Clearly, I was very perimenopausal by that stage. Don't worry about that. And all the symptoms that come with it. And I do think it's really important to get your hormones under control. And I think there previously was a lot of fear around HRT and different kind of things that there are options out there. And talk to your doctor about it. I think that's the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head, actually, when you said, if your doctor dismisses you, go and talk to another doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big one for, if you need it, go and see a therapist, go and see a counsellor, go and chat with someone external to, your partner or your family or your besties, because, if you're really struggling through all of these big life changes, whatever they may be, perimenopause, looking after parents, looking after kids, whatever those things are, going through relationship things, struggling at work, go see someone. There's no shame in that. In fact, it's so empowering, I think.
Interestingly, Sandy, so my father died 6 years ago, and that kicked off a massive transition for me in my life. So it was one of those perturbation points where everything was shit, and I went down in this deep sort of spiral, and then coming out of that was a massive game changer. My entire life changed, right? And I had some therapy then. I did all of this coaching work then. So I was doing deep sort of coaching work at that time, and as a client, not as a practitioner. So I had this sort of big self-development phase then, right? So just on this point of seeking therapy, perimenopause and that transition in life is a really interesting one, because it often brings up the next layer of the onion that needs to be sorted. So I had at that time dealt with all of my dad shit from my childhood. And, my mum is amazing, and I never hear a bad word about my mum. And my mum did the best that she could as a solo parent in the 80s. And this time of my life brought up this mum stuff, which I would never have looked at before. But now that I've got teenage kids and I'm looking at my parenting, and I'm looking at parenting differently, I'm looking at her parenting through a different lens, it's brought up this next layer of stuff that is very important for me to now heal, if we never heal, let's say that's a bit of a big word, but for me to now assess and make peace with, so that the next chapter of my life, right, can have greater ease and greater I don't want to say self-actualization, because that's like a never-ending journey, but the next layer of peace, because I clear all of my crappy baggage that I've been carrying around. So it makes sense that in these tough moments we get some help, because weird stuff comes up, and you hear suddenly I'm angry all the time, and suddenly I've got all of these different things, and yes, it's hormonal, but it's also some of this old stuff comes to the fore. Would you agree with that? Have you experienced that?
I 100% agree with that. And I've gone through that myself. I've seen friends or, watching friends go through it, who are all of a sudden they're I'm really mad at my parents. I'm really, or whatever. Or starting to just kind of, I guess, starting to think back in their lives to the things that may be triggering certain emotions. Because when we're going through perimenopause or menopause, obviously our hormones shift. And of course, we do have these moments where we're grumpy and we're not happy all the time, and that's okay. But I think when you're in those moments of anxiety or in those moments of stress or that's when a lot of things come up to the surface, as you so rightly say. So yeah, I definitely have. And I had to go through my whole journey of my mum's stuff. And, my childhood wasn't, everyone knows this, it's public knowledge. My childhood wasn't particularly, happy and that's okay. And I went through a lot of stuff, and I'm very grateful that I sorted that stuff out before my mum actually passed away, because my relationship with my mum in the last, 5 years of her life were extremely close. And I think I'm quite grateful for that. But you're right. I think a lot of stuff does come up, and it's really, I feel, for me personally, I felt like it was really important that I tend to face things pretty head on. I tend to do things 100% or not at all. And so I think those sort of things, I've been facing like childhood stuff for years and years and years and working through it, but stuff definitely came up during this perimenopausal phase of my life.
Which makes sense, right? So if you think but if you think about it, like what is the next phase as a woman after the procreation years? We go into being the wise women, right? So if you think about it, like how it was in the old days, you were procreating, and that was your role within the tribe or whatever, and then you move on to being an elder, and that's where we're at, right? We're moving into this next chapter, which is, it's called the crone, which I think sounds really bad, but like there's the crone, which is the wise woman. So we got to be dealing with all of our crap. We don't want to be dragging that. You can't drag your early crap into your crone years.
No.
Well, we need to get some T-shirts printed. Yeah,
crone life.
Entering my crone years.
I've had a couple of awesome chicks on the show who, one Pia in particular, who really she wanted to embrace. And, she had a podcast called Crone Life. I think she wanted to embrace that terminology, and I love it. And I joked with her about that as well. Like maybe we should all have a T-shirt. As you go through these phases, you just get presented a new T-shirt.
Totally. And it's like, don't mess with me, right? Don't mess with me, because like once you're in the crone years, like you don't give too many shits anymore. It's like, I know where it's at. I've got my stuff under control.
It's true. I think and this is the thing that I always am really quick to sort of talk to women about as well when I talk about perimenopause and menopause. And not that I'm, the all-knowing oracle of all of this stuff. But I do feel like as we get older, there are some positive things about aging. I'm very pro-aging, because one of the things is we do have less fucks to give, and that we don't have the time to be worried about all the other the shit that we used to stew on all the time. Don't sweat the small stuff we all, I know that's like, it seems cliched, but I honestly do believe we start to look at things as bigger picture. That's been my experience, and the experience of watching other women around me. We just don't have the tolerance, I think, to worry about all the other stuff. You so cleverly talk about in your book, FOPO, which I love, which is the fear of other people's opinions. I loved that. I was like, I don't think I've ever used FOPO before, but so thank you for that. I think this fear, when we're younger, this fear of what other people are thinking of us, and especially, it goes right through from our teenage years to our 20s to then our, we worry about what other people think of us as parents if we're parents. Not every person is a parent, but this constant fear, or we worry about, what other people in the workplace are thinking of us and judging us, and are we doing enough, and have we, do we have the best house, or are we driving the right car, or are they judging what I'm wearing today, or whatever, right? I think that I would like to think that as we get older, we care less about other people's opinions, and we start to really focus on how do I feel about myself.
I think it takes awareness of it. I do think, yes, that age definitely makes it, because remember that stuff was crippling when you were in your 20s.
Oh, God.
And in your teen years, all you want to do is fit in with a tribe. And if you think about it from a evolutionary point, it makes sense that you want to be within the tribe, right? Because you're vulnerable when you're outside the tribe. But I think as we get older, you're absolutely right. We do have less fucks to give. However, that good girl, that rocking the boat, that all of that sort of stuff, that is still sort of deeply ingrained, and it's in our, like, the programming that we have. So it's those times that we question our programming, or we do the therapy, or we do the coaching, and we try to understand a little bit more about, what it is that's driving this sense of fear of not being perfect, not having it all together, not of being seen as vulnerable or making a mistake or, all of that sort of stuff, like understanding what is driving all of that. I think that, yes, part of it is as we mature, there's maybe even just even less bandwidth for to be sitting, like think about all that so much. But it is also, I think, an intentional move, or it should be an intentional move to just keep peeling away those layers, right? Peeling away so that you can just be authentically you and enjoy you and accept you and know that you're awesome just as you are and still be able to keep moving forward. It's not about just like throwing up your hands and going, well, that's as good as it gets. It's being able to say like, yeah, I'm awesome and I'm worthy and I'm good enough and I'm going to keep moving forward because I wonder what else there is.
I love that. And one of the things I particularly loved, well, there's so many things about your book that I loved. I'm just putting it out there. One of the things I really loved, though, was that you do make a lot of references to good girls. Obviously, my podcast and my blog before that was called The Good Girl Confessional was tongue-in-cheek, absolute nod to this bullshit narrative that we've been fed as women, as young girls, right through to becoming women. Is that we're all meant to be so good and so quiet and so demure. There's a trend going around at the moment that everyone's supposed to be so demure, so, tongue-in-cheek. I think I really loved that you did that, but there was a moment in this book where you talk about your daughter and she looks at you. That little moment literally nearly broke me, I'll be honest. I was reading it going, oh, God, because I remember being that kid and wanting that reassurance from my mum as well. Like, am I a good girl? That was just such an extraordinary thing that you put in the book because I felt that's vulnerable to share that about your beautiful daughter. But it's this really interesting thing that no matter how much, even as women who have done work and who have all of those things and teaching our daughters, I've got a daughter, I have, 2 sons, but to my daughter, you don't want to pass those things on. You kind of want them to be armed with tools so that they're a bit more fearless than we were growing up. But in actual fact, you do see it bleed through still because it's societal, right? And they're dealing with, the first generation dealing with nonstop social media, right?
Yeah, you're right. I think it is super hard. However, as this generation of women who have the tools at 40, right? I feel like they got a much better chance at untangling from it. Like it's still sticky and they're still going to get caught in the webs. But if we can give them the tools at 10, 11, 12, to begin to question it, to begin to, have that sort of sense of self being reinforced and strong, even though the webs are going to try to entangle them. Maybe we're giving them the scissors early.
Yeah.
I didn't have any idea of that until I was much older and had fallen into all of the traps. The eating disorders and the violent partners and the accepting what I thought I was worthy of with shit partners or different things like that. My self-esteem really impacting how I moved through life. And it wasn't until I got the tools so much later. So I do think, and also, if I think we're much better at getting our kids some therapy or coaching or, being aware that there is stuff going on at school that actually is unacceptable. Whereas in the old days, it was like, oh, you'll be right,
Yeah.
When the tribe turns on you, I think that we are advocating for our kids much better. We're teaching them to advocate for themselves. My wish is that it will be easier for them. And I mean, we don't know. I mean, we know some of the long-term effects of social media, but we don't really know like the long-term effects of social media. I'm trying to keep mine off for as long as humanly possible.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but it's, it's hard. Like all of their friends have it. And maybe not my daughter so much, but my son, all of his friends have social media, and I'm like that one parent. And it's hypocritical because so much of my life is on social media and has been for so many years, because we knew each other through blogging. So blogging, when I was blogging, social media was my shop front. When I was a journalist, social media was my I guess how I shared all the stuff that I was up to. It was my calling card. And now, as a speaker, coach, and author, here I am again. Everything is on social media, including LinkedIn these days, right? So, so it's, I think, social media in itself is not inherently bad. How you use it makes a really big difference, but it's very, very difficult to teach young people that.
Yeah,
because it is designed to be very, very sticky. It is so
addictive. It is. I mean, that's it. That's its power. But I think, good for you. I think trying to keep your kids off it for as long as possible. My kids are adults. So, the big thing for them, one of my kids is 33 and then the next one down is 26 and then 24, right? So there was a big jump between 33 and 24. So, it started out as MySpace. Was the 33-year-old, MySpace, I need it. We didn't know what MySpace was. I said, sure, go on. Years later, when he would tell me all the stories of the things they would see and the people who would contact, I would go, what? And I just got a lot more savvy. But by the time, of course, Facebook came along with my younger two, and I stood my ground. And I know that they were really angry at me for a long time because all of their friends had Facebook. And I'm like, I don't care. You're not having it until you're this age. When they finally got on it, it was like, oh, yeah, and finally, I think things are even worse now. What we're seeing, of course, is Instagram, Snapchat. There's so many things that these kids have access to now. And we all know there's a rise of, porn. There's a rise of everything going on around them. It's really hard. I think the longer we can keep kids off it, I think is not a bad thing. I heard actually, was it this week, that something like young children primary school age can spend up to 4 hours a day looking at TikTok. And I thought, what? Like, I know that's frightening. And I do not.
I can't be too judgy.
Parents, I'm not. I'm like,
I can't be too judgy. My kid, like, instead of watching a TV series, my kids love YouTube, right? So they find the people that they like to watch, and, they watch hours of that. It's like, I can't judge. It's not like I'm a perfect parent by any stretch, and I know that, when I've been busy, certainly on my book launch, I know that they've been doing a lot of TVing. So
we watched a lot of John Van.
Anyone.
We watched a lot of TV.
Right. So
when we look back,
I watched a lot of TV.
And I think, even before all of these social media things were out, look, I've always been a working mum, always, with 3 kids. And there's, I've managed to now get over my mum guilt of all those years, because I think, but how would I know what my children were watching on television before I got home from work? Now, I would ask them and they tell me. And
there was no porn on it. Like it was like, there was no porn at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Channel 10.
No, and we did. That's the thing. But you kind of go, wow, like things have changed. I mean, streaming services, internet access, all of those things. It's like a bit of a whirl out there. That's for sure. I am really interested. I think my listeners are going to be really interested for how your journey went from, because you were a blogger, you were a journo, and then you became a life coach. Like, and it's a big journey in between. It makes it sound like it just happened overnight. It didn't happen overnight. As you know, I mean, I first knew about you through blogging, which was brilliant. Tell us how all of that happened. How did you become a blogger? How it turned into you becoming a journo, and now this journey into being where you are now.
Wow, that's a long time. So when I was heavily pregnant with my second child, so she's now 12 and a half, I was dying. I remember I desperately wanted to be a stay-at-home mum, and then I found it to be really monotonous. I loved my kids, but I was isolated, and I was bored, and all of that sort of stuff. So some friends of mine said, "Why don't you start a blog one day?" We're at Centennial Park, actually, in Sydney. Why don't you start a blog? I didn't even know what a blog was. I knew So Mrs. Woog was the only blog. Woog's World was the only blog I had ever heard of, and a friend of mine had sent me a couple of her newsletters or a couple of her blogs.
And a shout out to Kate.
Yes, shout out to Kate.
Shout out to Kate. Kate's been on here a couple of times as well. She's amazing. But you're right, it was the
awesome. Yeah, but she was the doyenne. She was the one, right? And I didn't really know what a blog was or how to do one or anything like that. But one of the joyful things about my very excitable brain is when I get an idea, I run with it. I don't mess around. So by that afternoon, I had a blog set up. I had never heard of Keeping Up with the Kardashians because they were quite new at that time. I called it Keeping Up with the Holsbys as a play on the Joneses, and Holsby was an amalgamation of my surname and my husband at the time's surname. So I did the blog for a number of years, like 2 or 3 years, and it went quite well. It's not like it made me any money or anything like that, but I had a solid base of readers who were interested in what I thought. But then my marriage ended. So my marriage ended when my kids were 2 and 4. I was a stay-at-home mum with no money of my own in the bank, so I needed some money quickly. The blog had been making me a little tiny bit, but not much. Nothing. I couldn't survive. It wasn't even like a part-time job. It was $500 here and there. It was very, very little. And then I knew that I had this great body of work, and I knew that I could write because people liked my writing. So I thought it was a small jump to start pitching to parenting online and print publications. And I started pitching ideas without really knowing how to write articles in a proper sort of feature style. So I also at that time went and did a quick magazine writing course at the Sydney Writers' School, and was literally learning on the fly. I'd have deadlines and be talking to my teacher being like, how do I polish this? How do I get the transitions right? How do I make this good enough that the editor is going to want to work with me again because I need to pay my mortgage and feed my kids? So that grew quite quickly. So I made the leap from parenting. So it was Essential Kids and Essential Baby at that time. They're no longer in publication. But I made the leap quite quickly to other kinds of publications, and I started getting into the health and well-being and writing relationship articles. And would I review this sex toy? Yeah, no problem. I was always known for being very authentic and open, talking about some of the more sort of taboo or tricky situations in life, because I know that the more open and honest we are with those things, the more people can relate. But we learn so much. Everybody has the same stuff, right? So yeah, I started doing that, and then I needed some stability and I needed some credibility. I've had imposter syndrome massively because I didn't have a journalism degree. I really was a mum at my dining table, absolutely busking, it felt like, even though things were going really well. So I decided to get some stability through a job, which I got at the Australian Women's Weekly, which I loved. And that was a really great moment in my writing because I was working with a team for the first time. It wasn't just me. Everyone was really supportive. My sort of direct reports, like my editor in the digital department, they were awesome, really supportive of me and of the women in my team. So it was nice to be a part of something, and I really loved that. And then there was a change in upper management, and I wasn't exactly fired, but I kind of was let go and unceremoniously let go with no explanation. And I was ghosted a bit. They said, wait, go home and wait for further news, and then no further news came. And so that was a really hard fall for me. And that was the beginning of me really burning out, because I was on my own, because it had been sort of this freelance roller coaster, and I had sort of all of the stuff of those years of like divorce and messiness all stacked up. I was a perfect storm, right? So I was drinking a shitload. I was drinking a lot, and things just kind of got a little bit out of control for me. So that's when I was like, I need to take a couple of months off to just recalibrate and get my feet back under me, because I felt so low. My self-esteem was really low. How could I lose my job without anyone even talking to me about it? And I felt like I was a failure and an idiot, and everybody knew that I sucked. Like all of that awesome internal dialogue that we pile on ourselves when what we really need is a good hug. So that's when I decided to take a little bit of time off. And it was during that time I got a call telling me that my dad was terminally ill with cancer. So I packed up my 2 little kids and we went to a remote part of New Zealand to help my dad to die in his own home. And that was one of those life experiences which was brutal, as Glennon Doyle would say. It was very, very difficult, but also an absolute honour to be able to have that experience with him. And it changed me forever. And now I know that even though that was really hard and it felt like the absolute like depths of awfulness, it absolutely had to happen so that I could then get on this road to where I am now. So I spent a number of months grieving on the couch. It was pretty grief is one of those things, like there is no right way and there's no wrong way to do it. But I was fortunate enough that I had some space. I was financially okay. So I didn't have to just push through. And so I didn't have to lay on the floor a lot and cried a lot. And eventually was like, all right, you need to get off the couch, kid. And that's when I went and decided to study life coaching, because I'd had an idea. I had written so much health and wellbeing stuff. I had this idea to repatriate all of my old health and wellbeing articles and create some kind of hub to help people who were feeling shit to feel better, whatever that was. I was researching all stuff about, the science of happiness and how to hack your own like sort of brain chemistry so that you could feel better. And so through that entire process, like this entirely new career was born. And I was in my early 40s. Like I would have been maybe 41 or so, 42. So, that's a lot of people would think that that's, I'm getting too old to change careers. I need to stay where I am and stay safe and secure. I just want to let you know. You're younger. You're the youngest now that you're ever going to be. So you may as well do stuff that inspires and excites you. So
true. Thank you for sharing that story, because I know, there's a lot of stuff in that. There's a lot to unpack, and but it will resonate with a lot of people. I know it did with me. I had a father who had Alzheimer's and passed away, and then my mum, who had a disability her entire life. And when she passed away, though, it was still fairly sudden and quite shocking and surprising. And so I think, my message is always to people, do the work now, because it gets harder, as I say, I think I'm glad I did a lot of work before my mum passed away, because I felt kind of more at peace with it. When my dad died, I was just so ill prepared, I think. Not that anyone can really prepare you for grief. We all know that. I really love in your book, I just want to say this, and I hope people will get so much out of this. But I do love that you put in these really gorgeous, tasty bites, which are little bits at the end of every chapter, sort of, I guess, takeouts, if you like. But I love that you put in these little tasty questions, and at the end there's all these, you call them tasty questions. I love that, because for me, it's like, oh, how brilliant, because you're really getting the reader to really think about themselves in that moment, which is really clever. Did you always know you were going to sort of do that? Was there always going to be this the sort of tasty questions at the end? Does that come from your incredible coaching experience?
So at first I was thinking I would do a handbook that accompanied the book, like some kind of PDF download or something like that. But then because we have decided to create the Chocolate Bar Life online program, so that is how to really take all of this juicy information that you've learned and apply it to your own life. Then, we decided that the handbook would go along with the online program. So I didn't want, though, for that to only be to people who bought that. Like, I really wanted everyone to have the capacity to utilize the information in their own life. And it starts with reflection, right? How could you apply that? So yeah, there was always the intention to leave the reader with the lens back on them. How we did that was an iterative sort of evolution for sure.
Yeah, well, I think it's very, very clever. And I know in reading the book.
Why, thank you.
You're a clever chick. I got a lot out of it. I really did, because when I read those questions, it was like, oh, hang on, I've got to actually think about myself. How rude that you would make me think about myself. I think it's actually really good, but I think very cleverly too that, it does force you to stop for 5 minutes and actually have real thoughts about things. And I think in that's clever too, because the whole thing about balance of work, rest, play, those moments of allowing ourselves to rest, it doesn't mean that we have to like clear our minds and just do meditation. It that rest can also be about like, introspection and thinking about our life and who we are and where we want to go. And it's in those quiet moments, I think. So I thought that was really quite clever that you did that in the book, because I was, oh, hang on.
Thank you.
Forced me to stop.
No, you're absolutely right. So it's often like the misconception is that rest means sleep even.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. So the rest is a basic biological human need. So that 8 hours of the day doesn't even count towards your balance. That just counts towards you being a functional human. So, what I'm really talking about with the rest is these, pops of restorative activity. So that is moments of reflection, moments of daydreaming, maybe it's stretching, maybe it's playing with your cat, like whatever it is, but it's moments of not go, constantly on the go. I'm so busy, more things to do, knocking off the to-do list, got to make the deadline, how do we recalibrate and reset our nervous systems over and over throughout the day so that when we get to the end of the day, we're not all hepped up and needing wine or whatever or coming and just snapping at our family because we've given the best of ourselves out for the whole day and just shaking up our little can of adrenaline and cortisol,
Yeah, very, very true. I am so, so thrilled that you joined me here today. Thank you. Thank you for this beautiful book. I think it is amazing. I think people are going to get a lot out of it. It's a gorgeous picture of you on the front too, by the way.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Should we give a couple of them away? Let's give a couple away. You want to do that?
Yeah, let's do it. I think that would be fabulous. All right, great. So maybe we'll do that. All right, absolutely. So maybe what we can do is we can ask people what their, what do they do to try and gain some balance in their life. Maybe we'll pick a couple of people and we'll give a couple of copies away. What do you think?
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks, Danielle. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. It has been. See you next time.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening along to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm really thrilled and excited that the Good Girl Confessional podcast is part of the WB40 Women Beyond 40 platform, a platform we created for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond to share their hard-won wisdom and to learn more information about the things that matter to us as women, midlife and beyond. Now, wherever you're listening to this podcast, I would be hugely grateful if you can follow, like and subscribe, because it helps the algorithm to actually reach more like-minded women. And they will realise that they're not alone in their journey, that's for sure. You might also like to know that we're over on YouTube. Join us there, The Good Girl Confessional. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as both The Good Girl Confessional and Women Beyond 40. And we're over on TikTok under Women Beyond 40. I would also like to thank the editor and producer of the podcast, Michael Smedley. As always, what a brilliant person. And thank you so much for listening along. I love you. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you soon.